So this is going to be an audio reading, a personal reading of a short story. The short story is called Night Flight, written by Takashi Atoda. Atoda-san is a very famous Japanese writer. He mostly specializes in short fiction, and he wrote most of the short stories. Most of the short stories that have been posted in English were written in the 70s and 80s. The short story that I am reading, Night Flight, is from a collection published by Tuttle called The Square Persimmon and Other Stories. And the edition I am reading from is a second printing paperback that was published in 2000, although the first edition was published in America in 1991. And again, it was published by Charles E. Tuttle Company, Incorporated. I am reading this short story in fair use. I am not trying to profit off of this in any way. I am just a very large appreciator of Atoda-san's work, and I want to share it with as many people as possible. However, I also want to encourage people to support the official English release of this because it's a wonderful collection. This particular translation was done by Millicent M. Horton, who's a great Japanologist, a great scholar, and someone I admire very much. And so I hope that everyone will support the English collection that this came from. Again, the title of the English collection is The Square, Persimmon, and Other Stories, published by Tuttle Books, and you can get this on Amazon on Kindle. You can also find used copies of the paperback on eBay for fairly cheap still. There will be a link in the description below to where you can officially purchase the Kindle edition of this on Amazon. And again, I'm not trying to profit off of this in any way. This is all fair use. Translation was done by Millicent M. Horton, and the reading of this particular story, Night Flight, will be done by Jacob Recktenwald. So let us begin. This is the story Night Flight by Takashi Atoda. At the end of January, on the night of a heavy snowfall, rare in the Kanto area, Toshiro Sakai ran into Shinichi Nishiwaki at the S Hotel in Yokohama. Sakai had won a night's lodging at the hotel for his wife and himself as a door prize at a year-end party. A hot springs resort, I can see, he had remarked to his wife at the time. But what's there to do in Yokohama in winter? You could treat me to a Chinese dinner, she had suggested. With this in mind, the two of them had left Tokyo to spend the night at the hotel in nearby Yokohama. But due to the unusual wintry chill, his wife had caught a cold and did not feel like going to Chinatown after all. Instead, they decided to have a light supper in their hotel. The hotel was quiet, and there were a few people in the coffee shop. Outside, a dark, icy sea stretched beyond the wharf side cranes, covered with snow. Almost immediately, a man wearing a tan sweater and seated near the window caught Sakai's attention. His face, turned toward the window, had not been visible at first, but when he looked towards the cash register to ask for a light, their eyes met. "Oh, Nishiwaki-san." "Sakai-san, it's been a long time." "How true. It's my fault for not keeping in touch." Nishiwaki had been a year or two ahead of Sakai in college, but they had painted together in the same oil study group. "What are you doing in Yokohama?" asked Nishiwaki. "I won a complimentary night at this hotel at a year-end party drawing. My wife's with me, too." Sakai called his wife over and introduced her. "And what about you? Are you staying here?" he asked in turn. Sakai was almost certain that Nishiwaki still lived in Meguro Ward in Tokyo, and he found it highly unusual for Nishiwaki to take a room in a hotel in neighboring Yokohama. And yet it was quite obvious that he was an overnight guest, since he had no overcoat, and a room key was lying on his table. "Yes, well," Nishiwaki replied evasively. Intuitively, Sakai speculated that his friend was there to rendezvous with a woman. Nishiwaki was a suave, good-looking man, and it would not have surprised Sakai if he had had several affairs. Nishiwaki's slightly embarrassed smile after they had exchanged glances seemed to confirm Sakai's suspicion. That being the case, it wouldn't do for him to stick around, he thought. Besides, his wife had just now finished her sandwich and was ready to return to the room. He searched for something casual to say. Hasn't it turned cold suddenly? The snow may pile up tonight. Probably, thanks to the weather. My wife's caught a cold. Oh no, that won't do. Not on this special trip for the two of you. It's not that bad. But if you'll excuse us. Surely. What room are you in? Asked Nishiwaki. Room 505, Sakai replied. I'm in 706. If you'd like, why not come up later? Nishiwaki asked. So he's not with a woman after all, thought Sakai. His wife had already started for the lobby. Perhaps. Sakai replied noncommittally and followed his wife out. Shut up in his room, Sakai watched television, but he was terribly bored. Even though he lay down, he could not get to sleep. Only his wife, breathing peacefully, slept soundly. Sakai dialed the hotel operator and asked for 706. I thought I might go down to the bar for a while, he suggested. The hotel bar is closed already. They close early at night. Why not come up to my room instead? Bring your wife, too. She's asleep already. What about it, then? I've got the whiskey and ice. Apparently, Sakai's impression that his friend might be accompanied by a woman was a total misjudgment. He took the elevator to the 7th floor and looked for room 706. It was nearly 11, and the hotel was deserted and hushed. The light was dim. Good evening, said Sakai, knocking at the door. Come on in, came back Nishiwaki's animated voice. His room, too, was barely lit, and with the curtain open, he appeared to be having a drink while watching the snow scene outside. Enjoying a snow viewing drink? I guess you might call it that. Actually, the view was not that attractive, since his friend's window faced away from the ocean. An unfriendly-looking building cast a yellowish light on the snow. Is scotch and water all right? Fine, thanks. Smoked cuttlefish and an opened can of cashew nuts were sitting on the table. Could he have taken the room for the sole purpose of drinking? Wondered Sakai. That seemed to be the case, but something about it did not quite fit. Are you in Yokohama on business? Sakai asked, the question he'd entertained earlier. No, I'm not, but how's your work going? As if deliberately avoiding Sakai's question, Nishiwaki changed the subject. It's about the same. No ups, no downs. I see. As for me, I guess you might say there are no ups, just downs. Sipping their drinks, they talked of work and gossiped about friends they had in common. It continued to snow, and the lights of the town began to go out, one by one. So, why do you think I'm here? It was getting late when Nishiwaki himself introduced the subject. They both were becoming somewhat lightheaded from the drinks. I have no idea, Sakai replied. Do you mind listening to a silly story? No, not at all. Sakai was struck by Nishiwaki's intense expression. He appeared to be very preoccupied by something. Your marriage was a love match, right? It wasn't any great romance, Sakai nodded. But it wasn't an arranged marriage either. Then you've experienced a love affair of sorts. Well, I'm not so sure of that. It probably wouldn't compare to your exploits, Sakai joked, but Nishiwaki did not smile. See those windows? Nishiwaki continued, pointing to the apartment house facing them. Yes, I see them. I know someone who lives behind one of them. Nishiwaki emphasized the someone. He pointed toward a 3-storied building. Out of the 20 windows, there were lights in 5 or 6. Which one? It's dark now. Sakai waited for Nishiwaki to continue, but Nishiwaki fell silent, seemingly counting the gently falling snowflakes. Then, after appearing to sniff the air in the room, he proceeded by asking a strange question. Are you familiar with a perfume called Night Flight? Never heard of it. In French, it's vol de nuit, I believe. Sounds as if it might have something to do with airplanes, but it doesn't. I think it got its name because a fragrance can become stronger in the darkness. It almost seems to float on the air. Oh? That's what that someone told me. It was her favorite perfume. Now I'm beginning to see the connection, thought Sakai. How about another drink? Sure, I'll have another one, thanks. Does the whiskey seem weak? Not really. At some point, Nishiwaki's drinks had changed from mixed to on the rocks. As if trying to get very drunk, he tossed down the dark-colored liquid in one gulp. I knew this person from way back, Nishiwaki returned to his narrative. At one time we were very close, but we had a fight over some petty thing and parted company. Almost 7 years passed without a word from her, and then suddenly there was a letter. When I opened the envelope, I caught a whiff of the perfume I just mentioned. The contents of the letter were quite ordinary, Nishiwaki continued. But the perfume, how can I describe it? It seemed to really convey her feelings. Is that so? After that, we got in touch with one another again. We'd been intimate in the past, so it was easy to make up. However, she was already married, and I too had a wife, so it was not all that convenient for us to meet. I would think not. Even so, we decided to try to see each other once a month. We arranged a day, and I was to get a room in this hotel and wait for her. At last, Nishiwaki's story was confirming Sakai's earlier suspicions. He wondered if she might be coming tonight. If so, he shouldn't be sitting here drinking whiskey, but instead should be getting ready to leave. He tried to read Nishiwaki's face, but the older man seemed quite intent on keeping him there. Have another. It's not even midnight yet. He appeared eager to continue with his confidential tale. If you really mean it, I'll have a little more. Sakai had lost count of how many drinks he'd had, but sipping on yet another, he became spellbound, as Nishiwaki revealed the details of his past affair. The letter had come to him at his office. Because she had used her married name, he had no idea who had sent it. He slid open the envelope. Ever so faintly, a sweet perfume wafted from it. He knew instantly then who the sender was. How many years had it been since they'd last talked? How was she? The delicate fragrance called to mind the happenings of a day long ago. Recollections, intimate and sensual, flooded his mind. She must have lightly sprayed the envelope with her perfume. That would be typical. She always took great care with even the slightest detail. The letter was simple and direct. She said that she had married and had a child, but occasionally she would recall the past. She closed by asking if he was married. He sat at his office desk, feeling overwhelmed. On the surface, the letter was casual, but in reality, to Nishiwaki, it was a revelation. Almost in reverence, he raised first the envelope, then the stationery to catch the subtlety of her fragrance. It was her fragrance of the time they had passed so happily together, and she had not always splashed herself with the scent. When concerned about her body odor, she had sprayed the flower perfume on certain places just before they made love. Thus, the traces of that scent faintly rising from inside the envelope were directly linked to their lovemaking. The scent became symbolic of their kisses, embraces, caresses. He felt her simple words cried out with emotion and love. He decided to risk meeting her again. She looked tired and a little thinner than when he had known her, and yet she appeared all the more beautiful. How good it is to see you, he said. I never thought we'd see each other again. You haven't changed at all. But why did we leave each other, I wonder, she said. I don't understand myself. It was your fault, she accused him. Why? Didn't you say you didn't want to see me anymore? Because you didn't love me. Really? I thought you had grown tired of me. There's no point in going over all this now, she replied. Isn't your marriage a happy one? He asked. Does it appear that way? What about yours? We're an ordinary couple, I suppose. Their conversation touched upon their past relationship, and then veered away from it. If they had parted during the awkward moments that followed the intimate parts of their talk, there would have been no point to their meeting. The briefness of the time remaining made them both submissive. The woman turned slightly aside, causing her shoulder to almost touch him. In a low whisper, she revealed that she had wanted to see him. I want to make love to you, he said, his eyes probing as if to see through her clothing. The woman's tremble was reminiscent of her passion at the height of their embraces. I said I want to make love to you. I know, she agreed, nodding. But not today. I have to get back. I'm sorry. I barely managed to get away, she said, covering her face with her palms. I understand. When can we meet again? What should we do? Tomorrow or the day after. Can you come to Yokohama? Yes, I'll think of a way. Promise? Yes. This is the way his trip to Yokohama started. Fortunately, there was a hotel opposite her apartment. From there, he was able to observe the light in her room at night. She had told him that her husband came home late once or twice a month when he had to work the evening shift. She would put her 3-year-old to bed, turn off the lights, and slip out of the house. The man would stand by the hotel window and, having a drink to pass the time, wait for her to come. The light going off in her room indicated that she would soon be with Nishiwaki. If the light in her room went on while she was in the hotel, it meant that something unforeseen had happened. Her husband had returned, or her child was awakened. It was a secret tryst that was all too brief, a moment of love as risky as walking a tightrope. The woman pushed open the door. Nishiwaki put his arms around her. Instantly, their lips met, and together they sank to the bed. You're late. I've wanted so to see you. Impatiently, he tore at her clothes. Their ardor spread like a prairie fire, and their emotions burned up in the flame. The fragrance of her perfume faintly floated about in the darkness. Your perfume. It's called Night Flight. Ah, it seems to float in the darkness. Just as it came floating out of your envelope to me. You noticed? Of course, I will never forget it. To me, it is you just as you are now. With his fingers, he deeply probed anew for the source of the fragrance. Dearest, dearest, she cried out in a faint voice, overcome by her ecstasy. After their lovemaking, their fingers entwined. They checked to make sure there was no light on in her bedroom. It's as though I have no connection with the person who lives there, she said. I know. It's so hard on me when I look at the hotel from the window. It's just as hard on me looking at your window. But I have the longer period of pain. It's only when I'm here that I'm alive. I think of you at work. There are times when your perfume suddenly comes to me. Really? Yes, truly. When can we meet again? It's up to you, he said. I'll let you know. May I see you home? Thank you, but we'll be noticed. The woman straightened her dress and, as if trying to sever any lingering attachment, quickly started out, saying, Well then, goodbye. Only a hint of her perfume lingered on. He went back to the window. The light in her window came on, and he gazed at it until it went out. There were times when exhaustion would cause him to fall asleep before she came. Those times he would always dream about her. Sometimes he dreamt that they were being chased. Holding hands, they would run and hide in a dark hole, hardly daring to breathe. Then her scent would come to him. Would that fragrance give them away? As his fear grew, the woman would become even more brazen, and the scent would become almost overpowering. He would open his eyes in terror, and there would be the woman kneeling beside the bed, looking at him as he slept. Ah, you've come. Your eyelids were twitching. I was dreaming. What about? About you. I could smell your perfume. Really? When he stretched out his hand and explored her body, the woman writhed. At each moment, her fragrance flowed forth. Their love affair continued in this way for several months. It always seemed that they were desperate for time. Their passion consumed every minute, allowing no time to discuss the future. It was as if they had a mutual agreement to live only for the present. The two would embrace fervently, letting their carnal pleasure determine the direction of their love. Suddenly, there was no further word from her. Nishiwaki assumed that something was wrong, and yet he waited to hear from her. A week passed, then 2. Soon a month had elapsed and still no word. At that point, he went to Yokohama to find out what had happened. It did not take him long. The woman no longer lived in the apartment house. The owner of a small general store nearby supplied fragments of the story. Another light went out in one of the apartment windows. The night had deepened. Sakai, listening to Nishiwaki's story, gave his own imagination free rein. He found it hard, however, to conjure up an image of a woman. She was probably in her mid-30s. He could easily picture a woman of fair complexion, round eyes, and thick hair, but the combination of subdued modesty and almost violent passion seemed not quite lifelike. There was something vague and incomplete about Nishiwaki's tale, something as intangible as groping about for the fragrance of a flower in the darkness. At some point, the snow had stopped falling, and the earth shone white underneath the black of night. It would surely freeze tonight. As if in contrast, the ice cubes in the ice bucket had long since melted, and the two men sat in the overheated hotel room sipping iceless drinks that tasted bitter, like some cheap brand of whiskey. Sakai paused for a moment in the narrative and said, "Something unforeseen had happened, right?" "Yes." "Her husband found out?" "No." "What happened?" "She became ill very suddenly and died." "The woman?" Sakai gasped. "Right. Apparently it was pneumonia. Do people actually die of pneumonia these days?" "There was a terrible cold spell around the beginning of November when she got sick. The illness affected her brain, and the doctors couldn't save her." "Is that possible?" "That's what the store owner told me. Actually, I don't really know the details. She was never in very good health. She probably overdid it and then didn't take care of herself." Not being able to totally comprehend the cause of her death, Sakai reasoned that perhaps there was some truth to the idea that fair-complexioned people are apt to be more sickly. "That must have come as quite as a shock to you." "I couldn't believe it for a while. So many possibilities crossed my mind." "What do you mean?" She didn't say much about her husband, but I assumed that he wasn't very affectionate. I don't think he ever found out about our relationship, but it's just that..." "It's just what?" "You're a married man, so maybe you'll understand. The way I see it, a wife can get very stubborn, even independent, if she and her husband aren't getting along. In this case, I think that she did not confide in her husband at all. She simply put up a facade that everything was normal, and she carried it off so well that he never even realized that she was sick until it was too late." Ah. One window remained lit. Sakai wondered which window it was that Nishiwaki kept his eyes focused on. The woman must have longed for her beloved while struggling for breath. She must have longed for Nishiwaki's comfort. However, the illness attacked her brain before she was able to confide in anyone or share her desperate feelings. Perhaps she had been able to see this hotel from her sickbed near the window. The man's image must have faded bit by bit in her consciousness until finally she slipped into a coma. Wouldn't she have wanted to see him again, even if for an instant? Nishiwaki continued to gaze fixedly at the darkened apartment building. Only the street was white. "I can't help but regret it all." "I'm not surprised. That's why you come to the hotel, then? To remember her?" "Yes. At least, in the beginning, it was for that reason." "What do you mean?" "After this relationship, my wife and I didn't get along, and I couldn't keep myself from returning to Yokohama. I still can't believe that she's dead." "I understand. After all, it happened so abruptly." Nishiwaki shook his head. "That's not what I meant." Sakai, surprised by the subtle change in his friend's voice, looked up. Nishiwaki's face was pale and stiff, as if he were anxious about something. "When I wait in this room, she comes here." Sakai said nothing. "Before I know it, she's here, somewhere in the room." As if searching for an invisible shadow, Nishiwaki looked around the dimly lit room. "How do you know? How do you know that she comes?" "The smell of flowers, the smell of perfume suddenly drifts through the air. When I leave the lights off, it's very obvious. Only the fragrance comes floating through the darkness. 'Ah, you've come,' I say, and unmistakably the scent approaches. I'm sure she'll come tonight, too. She'll be here before long.'" Nishiwaki reached out and turned off the light. It was almost 1 by the time Sakai left the room. Nishiwaki, lying on the bed, was muttering over and over, "She's coming. Her perfume will come to me." He must be drunk, thought Sakai. He is totally calm and collected, normally, but the unusual circumstances of his love affair must have clouded his reason. The drink, combined with his desire, must be the cause, Sakai guessed. "Good night," he said. "Oh, good night," answered Nishiwaki. There was only a dim footlight in the hallway. It was deadly quiet. Even Sakai's footsteps could not be heard. He watched each number on the panel light up as the elevator rose from the lobby. The door opened. The elevator was empty. However, a faint smell, without a doubt the sweet fragrance of perfume, drifted past Sakai, moved gently in the direction of the door he'd only just come through, and smoothly hurried along.